I'm Trapper Fowler, your Habitat Connectivity Director here at Wild Virginia. And tonight we're lucky to have biologist Andrew Try speaking to us about the Wildlife Society's Out in the Field initiative. Andrew, thanks for helping us celebrate Pride Month and supporting Pride Month. Thanks to Out in the Field for all you do all year round to support the LGBTQIA plus community and their allies, such as myself. I even have my Out in the Field T-shirt on tonight that I made during a social for Out in the Field back in October in Edmonton at the annual conference for the Wildlife Society. So great event. Met a lot of good people and saw a lot of old friends. First, just some housekeeping items. I'll let you know that, again, this program is being recorded and it'll be available later as a recording. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. You can put your name and where you're joining us from tonight. That's always cool to see where everybody's from. For questions, please locate those, as always, in the Q&A box versus the chat. We'll get to those at the very end and field as many as we can with time allowed. We can all learn from your questions, so don't be shy to post them. And again, you'll receive a follow-up email with some helpful links about this recording, about some of the content that the speaker shared. Feel free to share the recording and any of the content with friends, family, and colleagues. In addition to our habitat connectivity program that I help manage for Wild Virginia, we also have the water quality program, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. That is led by Mr. David Sly. So please be sure to tune into some of those program events and advocacy engagement opportunities that are upcoming. Also want to thank Kylie and our intern Lila for ensuring everything runs smooth tonight and helping with the Q&A session at the end. Please note that Wild Virginia can't do this work without your support. We get our energy from you all, energy to keep pushing for better habitat connectivity and water quality protections. Please consider supporting Wild Virginia. We appreciate your support, whether that's through donating or just helping to advocate, using your voice. Everybody can help in their own way, and we sure do appreciate it. So, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker this evening, biologist Andrew Try. Andrew, or Andy, is a PhD and a certified wildlife biologist. He's the Bear project leader for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, and he's an organizer for the Wildlife Society's Out in the Field initiative. Out in the Field is committed to fostering an inclusive and welcoming culture that creates visibility and support for the LGBTQIA plus wildlife biologists and their allies. Here's some general contact information for us over at Wild Virginia, should you need it, while we switch over to Andy's screen. Andy, whenever you're ready, please feel free to take it away, and I'll stop sharing.
All right. Can't beat that for an introduction. Thanks, Trapper. So as Trapper said, hey y'all, I'm Andy Try. I'm the Bear Project Leader for Minnesota Department of Natural Resources during my day job, but I'm coming at you as an organizer for the Wildlife Society's Out in the Field initiative. And so the Wildlife Society is one of the professional societies that wildlife biologists are members of. Much like, the American Chemists Association, that sort of thing. It's a professional society that was founded in 1937. We have over 11,000 members, both professionals who are practicing wildlife biology, as well as students. There's multiple levels, national society, and then there's regional chapters and student chapters and locals. But essentially, its mission is to inspire, empower, and enable professionals to sustain wildlife populations and habitat through science-based management and conservation. And so this is basically where we go for professional development, networking, There's some advocacy that's done, and this is where we all go. We all meet annually. Well, let me phrase that. There's an annual conference. We don't all get to go annually. It's held multiple places across the country, and now in Canada, now that we have a Canadian chapter. And that's kind of where this all started. And so, for kind of some basic definitions and concepts here, um, Trapper did the long version. There's an even longer version. I think we'd also accept like alphabet people is fine, but we generally use LGBTQ plus for what we're going to talk about today. That's for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer related identities. And so sometimes it's iterated a different way. There's other variants, LGBT, LGBTQIA, 2 plus, lots of different individual orientations or gender identities that are under this big umbrella. Um, Lots of different intersections, but essentially another way to refer to it is the queer community. That's a term that we have sort of reclaimed as our own through time. Um, for a for a while there, it was GLBT for quite a long time as I was growing up, but that got switched. Just as a fun fact, it got switched after the AIDS crisis in the 1980s. What ended up happening is that it was primarily afflicting gay men. They were the ones that were having the biggest dying at the fastest rates from it. And it was often the lesbian nurses that stood up and took care of these people. They were often treated like lepers in the 80s. And so it was the lesbian nurses that took care and cared for these people. And so that's why they moved to the front of the line. So it's always L first. But these terms evolve over time. As I mentioned, they vary from person to person. Individual identities can change through time. It's kind of like it's just a spectrum. And so, I can't possibly speak for every possible intersection. I don't represent the whole community, that would be impossible. So I'll just kind of talk about me and my little tiny wedge of the pie. So I've worked for universities, I work for a state agency, and I'm mid-career. I've been working at this for about 20 years. I'm a cisgender, meaning identify as what it says on my birth certificate. Married white gay male that lives in a pretty rural part of Minnesota, up on Minnesota's Iron Range. And so it's very socially conservative, despite the large labor presence that is maybe more politically liberal. But throughout my career, I've lived in Texas. I've lived in Appalachia. I got my PhD in West Virginia. So lived a number of different places across the country. And so I've, sort of witnessed harassment of the queer community. I've been too scared to intervene in a lot of places. I didn't come out professionally for quite a long time, and had to keep my identity hidden over worried of like getting terminated for a lot of my career. You could be terminated for being gay. And I've had to pass over a number of jobs in a wide area of the country just due to not feeling safe in some of those areas. Um, and so this is kind of common as well in the field. And so the start really happened back in 2019. One of our founders, Travis Booms, he's the one in the lower left-hand corner there. He wrote this article in our professional magazine saying basically, I'm one of you and identified as a gay biologist. And that once that hit, it just became a groundswell of support of other queer biologists. We have Claire, Colleen, and Katie also in the lower left-hand corner. These are like the founding four, but we've expanded since then. Um, and it was created to primarily for visibility, so that we can support and mentor each other, work with allies to create just a more inclusive and welcoming culture that supports all kinds of diversity. Wildlifers in general, we support diversity for animal species. A good, healthy, thriving system is a diverse system just for species. And that also applies to biologists if you have, or just any sort of piece of society where if you have a diverse set of views and a diverse set of people, often you'll end up with a better, more well-rounded outcome. Um, for considering different viewpoints and often better conservation success as well. Aldo Leopold, one of the founders of our profession, one of his most famous quotes out of the Sand County Almanac was something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing here, um, the I'm sorry, the most important thing for intelligent tinkering is to keep all the cogs and gears. Basically, meaning if you're going to start working to conserve a system and make changes, you need to keep all the parts. And so that is the very same with, restoring a prairie or increasing forest health. You have to keep all the pieces. You can't just drive towards one outcome and expect it to be as healthy and vibrant as it was without all the pieces. So, um, at the 2019 conference, um, we this is the royal we. This is out in the field. This is before I started on the in the initiative, but um, they decided to have some ribbons, a little pledge card, and pins, and then have a luncheon. And to be honest, they were completely worried that no one would show up, and they figured, we'll just have the lunch with the four of us, and then it'll be fine. But it was an outflowing of support. I think there was something like 200 people showed up to that very first one. There were lines out the door. People were sitting on the floor having lunch. Like way not enough food was prepared. We couldn't have prepared ourselves for the amount of support that poured out at that meeting. And so, with that, we kind of the three goals of Out in the Field are to increase visibility of our wildlifers in TWS, build the community of queer wildlifers, and then identify ways to support the community, including students in that profession. And so, as I just mentioned, we started with the pins. These are those same three goals again. And so we just attached a little card to the pin. We gave them away for free, but we wanted it to not just necessarily be a token like, hey, it's another piece of free swag. It actually means something. And so by attaching this little card that says, by wearing this pin, I express my belief that wildlifers, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression, deserve to feel welcome, respected, and valued in accordance with the bylaws and the code of ethics for the Wildlife Society. So that made it a little more concrete in people's support. And there are so many pins across the conferences these days. It's just a sea of support. It's just I'm overwhelmed almost every time we go to a conference for the folks that come out, both members of the community and the allies. And so to take us back, in the United States, we've had a long kind of history of discrimination and harassment. And some of these are, cultural, structural, and other barriers to inclusion in general. And so I'll cover some of these on the right-hand side here. This is not an inclusive list, but some of the big kind of push for the eras, events, and court cases that have affected the community through time. Just to kind of give some context with, being Pride Month at all. And so Pride itself started after the Stonewall riot in 1969. It was a bar that was raided over and over again by police. And these men, mostly men, but also some trans women as well as some lesbians also were arrested. Over and over again, these were raided by police. And so Pride itself spawned out of that as a protest to these police actions at the time. But also for government related stuff, many of us work for the government or our NGOs are supported by government grants and that sort of thing. And so by executive order, President Eisenhower included a morality clause around the same time as the Red Scare was also the Lavender Scare in the 50s, where I think it was McCarthy said something like, I know that there are X many card-carrying communists and homosexuals in the federal government, which turned out to be completely bogus, but started this like inquest into federal government work to try to root out all the homosexuals that were there. It destroyed people's careers. It kicked longtime public servants out of public service. It was kind of it was a really dicey time. Um, but that ended in the 70s. But essentially, you had 15 years of this. Around that sort of time, you're getting into the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s. Um, ACT UP is a advocacy group because nothing was being done at the federal level to combat the AIDS epidemic, or very little was being done through the Reagan administration, and so this was to add more pressure. Um, Kind of in my early lifetime as a young man, Don't Ask, Don't Tell in the military started in 94. This was a compromise to allow queer members to serve as long as they didn't, they weren't public about it and they stayed in the closet. Um, Around that same time, right about the time I was planning to come out, Matthew Shepard was murdered in Wyoming. He was a young college student who um, hit on a guy he thought was attractive in the bar, and these two guys, the guy he was hit on and his friend, took Matthew out, beat the crap out of him, drug him up, and strung him up on a barbed wire fence and left him to die. And so that was quite scary as a young person. Um, that this is what happened to people who are gay. Around that same time, marriage was delineated as between one man and one woman. Yet another, kind of situation that, oh, you're not led me to believe that, hey, this is not a desirable thing. You're not wanted, just to exist as a person. But we've made a ton of progress since then. Um, 2009, Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act was in 2009 um, to uh, to outlaw hate crimes in general. Um, Bostock, Clayton County, that ruled that Title VIII protects employees against LGBTQ plus discrimination. Now, there have been some tweaks on this, pushing back on it. Um, Same-sex marriage is now allowed after the Bearsville decision in 2015, and then the Respect for Marriage Act was an act in 2022 that essentially um, struck down a lot of the Defense of Marriage Act and codified into law that same-sex marriage is legal, as well as interracial marriage. It was just a general marriage act, um, which is particularly important for those of you that are in Virginia. Virginia is for lovers. Super huge civil rights case back in the 60s, Loving versus Virginia. Definitely check that out if you've never heard of it. Super important. But long story short, these barriers are problematic, and STEM in general, that's science, technology, um, engineering, and math. Although depending on how you spell STEM, there's another M that gets added. But basically, it's the science and engineering professionals path, I should say. M can also mean medicine, and so it just depends on how you're defining that. But the long and short of it is that based on some survey work, um, queer professionals are about 20% less likely to be in STEM than what should happen given the general population. And a lot of them leave STEM way before college. Sometimes they get turned off of it in high school. My own husband wanted to also work in some sort of biology, but he switched schools due to bullying and never picked it up again. And so this is kind of a common thing among, queer folks. Um, in addition, we also need out in the field because demographics are shifting. And so this is from a Pew poll back in 22. But essentially, if you look at the millennials and Gen Z, you're looking at about a quarter of them, are identifying as members of the queer community. For younger generations, it's like of 18 to 29-year-old adults, which are not millennials anymore. I'm sad to say, as a millennial myself, but they identify as queer. Um, and then younger adults are more likely to identify as transgender or non-binary than older generations. It's not as if there's like something in the water and things are changing. It's just that society has changed and become more tolerant, and it's safer for or rather was safer, except for, the last 2 years or so, to be queer and out. And it has less dire consequences in general than it used to. And so, of the ones that identify as queer in that 19 to 29 group, most of them are bi, and many hide that identity. They're not necessarily out. Sexuality is a spectrum. Um, there are some that, prefer one gender, others that, the full spectrum is things that they're attracted to. And so it's just different with everybody. And so the tricky thing still to this day, even though we have a lot of young biologists coming up in the field, is that there's still a lack of visibility in much of STEM. And that's one of our goals. And so it's visibility is our primary deal. And so we want to make it not only show that there are queer biologists out there, because until that article was written, I knew very few, and now there are hundreds that just in our own society that we can interact with and share those things. This will be pretty text heavy, so I'll kind of just summarize these slides as I go. These are based on surveys, et cetera. But this is recorded, and you're welcome to circle back on these, in your own time. But essentially, roughly half to 2/3 of queer individuals report employment discrimination. Based on this is based on a UK poll. 90% of transgender respondents report harassment or discrimination at work. And then about a third of these scientists this is all sciences that they polled, but about a third of them said that they're considering leaving their job because of hostile climate or unfriendly or discrimination. And so, safety and acceptance of the places we work is really important, and it's places that where we can improve. It's particularly pervasive in the queer community, and it's much worse, or I should say, the severity of harassment and discrimination gets compounded by other intersections of who we are. And so it's particularly worse for women in general, for the harassment that are queer. And then it's even worse for people of color. And then if you're a woman who's also a person of color in the queer community, these things stack together. And so one recent study shows that 4 out of every 5 transgender respondent that took this poll had suicidal ideation. I mean, let's just pause right there. Like 4 out of 5 of the LGBTQ plus folks in STEM that were surveyed considered suicide at one point. Half of them have reported recent self-harm, non-suicidal, and then about a third of them reported hazardous substance abuse. And so people are self-medicating in these hostile environments just to kind of get by. And the suicidal attempts for queer folks is something like 5 to 6 times higher than it is for the average person. These have pretty tragic and dire results. The other one is based on a recent survey from the American Physics Society. So the reason I picked physics is because I think Dr. Sally Ride is freaking rad. She was a physicist and the first LGBTQ plus astronaut. But she stayed closeted almost her entire life. She was with her partner for 27 years before she passed in 2012. And the relationship was only revealed in her obituary because she didn't feel comfortable being out. Based on that survey, about a third of them felt pressured to stay closeted at work. 40% thought their workplace expects them to not act too gay. That's kind of a spectrum of what that actually means, but take that as it is. For about 40% observed exclusionary behavior due to their identity, and it was much higher for trans respondents. It was 3 times higher in women. And then again, as I mentioned before, it compounds with people of color. And so that's, harassment, sexual and verbal, homophobic comments, purposeful misidentification of gender. That would be using the name or the pronoun that was before that transition. It's often called the dead name. It's quite offensive to folks that are transgender. And then just excluding folks from social activities, study groups, stereotyping, all that sort of thing. And about a third of these physicists consider leaving the field after over the last year. Partially, one of the reasons why these were so hard is that they're not visible allies. And so for those of you that don't identify as queer, but are an ally, being out as an ally is equally important. So the last couple years have been difficult. This is just the last year's legislature for the 2026 legislative session, and it's not over yet for all the states. Some of the legislatures are still in session, but over 500 bills for anti-queer bills have been introduced across the country, including in my own state. You can see it's really hard and heavy in the Midwest, but not, not all that different, in the Mid-Atlantic or the Southeast, et cetera. Often, I would say most of these are anti-trans bills. Not all of them have passed, but there seems to be renewed vigor to alienate and other this group of folks in general. But there are, bills across the country affecting queer folks. Again, this is text heavy. I'm just going to summarize some of these, but this is a survey of young people. So these are people that are going to be entering university soon. So 13 to 17. These are our future biologists. This was a poll conducted by the Trevor Project, which is a suicide prevention project for queer youth. But the long and short of it is that with the way things have been going, about a third of youth have considered attempting suicide. 40% of transgender and non-binary people have considered suicide. 10% have actually attempted it. A little under half wanted mental health care in the past year, but weren't able to get it. 90% said recent anti-queer laws, policies, and debates cause them stress and anxiety. Young kids, it's rough enough being 13 to 17, just going through high school. High school was rough, but it's worse for these kids. It's compounded again by that same sort of thing, these institutional and structural barriers. It's harder for women, and then it's harder for people of color, and these compound where those intersections go together. Those that were not provided gender affirming care, and in this case, I'm mostly talking about those that wanted hormones, were twice as likely to, the ones that couldn't get the hormones were twice as likely to commit suicide, or rather attempt suicide than those that could get those hormones. And then 60% experienced bullying in the last year. And those that were bullied, again, reported those higher rates of attempting suicide. Like we're not only using youth in getting into STEM in the first place, like the future, but we're also just losing them in general due to a lot of this sort of harassment. So we're going to hard pivot, because that was kind of heavy material, to back to out in the field for what we do, what we provide, and then we'll kind of end with some kind of easy wins to make things better, and then open up for questions if we have time. So for out in the field in general, if you want to follow us, we do have a Twitter. Unfortunately, I think that's our only social media. I think there's a Discord that's fairly active now. It's unfortunate that, well, I'm still going to call it Twitter, but it's unfortunate that it's kind of a harsh platform, but we do have a presence there. We also are on the website, wildlife.org/out in the field with hyphens in between those. That's our main website. We have offered virtual happy hours for queer wildlifers. This started in the pandemic when we were all dying for communication and we couldn't have our conference. It was canceled for, I think, 2 years. And so it started off like this. We have these quarterly, and we also have in-person meetings. This was the very first one. I think we counted 200 at the first head. But we've had a number of these socials since, and the numbers keep growing for the size of our meetings, et cetera. We will be meeting in this year's conference in Des Moines. So if those of you that are wildlifers and are coming, you're more than welcome to join us. But essentially, we're just about growing community, increasing visibility, and trying to make things better for queer folks. We also developed a packet, and so this was designed to share tools and outreach materials and things to help spread the initiative. It's available to everyone, and it has a lot of helpful things just in general about how to be more inclusive. But it has instructions on how to use the packet, how to do your own out in the field situation for local wildlife related subunits. So like I said, there's the national, there's regionals, there's state chapters, and then there's student chapters. But also in here, there's all kinds of information about the initiative, as well as some ways to be more inclusive in general. More information on how to use pronouns, some of the articles we've had added over the years, and kind of what we do and where. We have the pins that we've talked about before. And so these aren't strictly available, or I should say, these aren't strictly restricted to just TWS members. Essentially, these are available to anybody who supports and follows the bylaws and code of ethics of the Wildlife Society. But these are great ways for allies to showcase, hey, I support you, and I support the out in the field as an initiative. By wearing one, you're subscribing to the terms and conditions as I have outlined before. But basically, you're saying, hey, I welcome queer wildlifers. I support you. Let's do good things and make conservation success. For those that are queer, we do offer ambassador ribbons, and so these are for people that are comfortable being out. And so whenever I go to the conferences, I wear these. Essentially it's a way to identify yourself with the initiative and being kind of a person visible and willing to carry that burden to be out and proud, and then people can approach you and talk about the initiative in general. And they also can distribute some of our materials as well. We also have some other, there's the articles that we've worked on. We haven't released an article in a couple years, unfortunately. That's one of the things I hope to turn around. But also there's a helpful thing in that packet for how to be an ally. And that in general, it's just basic golden rule kind of stuff, but there are specific things you can do to maybe add some little flashing neon lights to showcase that. Because queer folks, we're always sort of looking for some of those subtle signs that is this a safe person to talk to interact with? Is this a safe space? But in general, our website is the best way to interact with us. These are all the organizers here, with the exception of Liz Hillard, who wasn't able to make it to that meeting. But you can approach any one of us. We have all of our contact information up on the website. If you want to reach out at any time, we're happy to answer any questions or put you in touch with local folks that might be able to better answer your question. But the long and short of it is, like, if we want to be a society and a profession where everybody feels proud to be who they are and bring their whole self and not have to live this like double life, there's some work to do. And so we'll get into some of these. These are these right here are some of the coming out reasoning that people have written on cards. This is pulled out of the Transgender and Gender Nonconforming Fieldwork Alliance newsletter, which is a really good for those of you that like lead trips or have local groups that are out there. There's tons of stuff to make it safer for people and members of the queer community in general, but just ways to be more inclusive. So, like coming out, that's kind of a big deal for us. It is a never-ending process. There's the coming out to friends first, often, and then your family, and then you have to figure out if you're gonna do it professionally. And anytime I meet a new person, I've got to figure out, is this person safe? Is it worth doing? Is it relevant? Oftentimes, interacting with the public, it's not actually relevant. But, the minute you start talking about, like any sort of small talk with your person, like family comes up pretty quick. And so you have to decide, what are you going to say? Doing job interviews. Oh, hey, do you have a family? Are you married? You know, Invitations to even holiday parties in the office, are you going to say spouse? Are you going to say wife? Are you going to say husband? It kind of depends on the situation. And that's called code switching. We do that all the time. And so just figuring out as a colleague or just a person who might know some queer people, trying to use some language that is inclusive in general is helpful. Um, and then that not everybody might like if a queer person comes out to you and feels comfortable doing so, that's great. Um, they might not be fully out to everyone, and so you don't want to accidentally out them, to people they're not comfortable for. It's their choice, and you don't want to unintentionally, you know, spill the beans accidentally. It does happen. And then sometimes those conversations are super awkward. And so it's just best to try to be inclusive. If you're inviting people to a party or a birding event or whatever you're working on, brush cutting, buckthorn removal, whatever, um, kudzu cutting, whatever, uh, try to just use inclusive language. This is the big thing for that one. Um, and so what I mean by that, the the easiest way I can do this is, are the things that you're doing gender neutral? So if you have a sign up list, are the forms you're using gender neutral? Are you required to indicate a sex? Is it really necessary for the data you're collecting? Probably using gender identity is a better way to go. Even if it's the standard what's offered at the driver's, the DMV, you know, identify as, male, female, non-binary. Those three options are pretty inclusive. It's not all encompassing, but that's a good way to start. Um, and the thing I miss most, up here in Minnesota, we often use you guys instead of y'all, which I think is unfortunate. So y'all means all. This is one of my favorite pride related things. This is completely stolen, I think, from a pride organization in North Carolina. But y'all is super inclusive. The only thing probably more inclusive than y'all is all y'all. And so that's something I've been trying to impart, at least on my fellow Minnesotans. Um, Less of an issue for folks in Virginia. Y'all get it. And so just keep using that. Um, Pronouns are integral to how we identify. And you can do a few little things just to showcase that and make it feel comfortable for people to indicate their own pronouns. It'll often make things super less awkward in general. Like I go by Andy, the amount of people that have misgendered me, I'm a 6.5 foot tall dude, and my name gets spelled Andi like Andy McDowell. So it's I know a number of people, Casey, Stacy, Kim. There's a number of folks I've worked with named Kim that are both male or female. And so you can just offer up like, hey, I'm Andy. I use he, him pronouns and just leave it be. If you accidentally misgender somebody, um, just apologize, fix the problem, and move on. If you make a huge deal about it, it makes it super awkward for somebody who might use different pronouns than how they present. So just roll on, keep moving on. And then just like put stuff in your email signature. If you're starting meetings, just introduce yourself with your pronouns. It's really easy to do, and it means a huge deal to those that are perhaps using different pronouns than they present, or just in general, maybe those that are using they, them, or other pronouns, and just make it easy. Um, Gaining competency, this is more for folks that lead a group, but in general, like if you want to figure out more about the community, um, going to some of these organizations is a really good idea. Um, But if you're leading groups, if you want to be inclusive, the leader of the group has to set the tone. And so they should be educated in some basic inclusion topics for the queer community, basic diversity stuff, and comfortable using pronouns, understanding what it means to be inclusive for a lot of different things. Um, Outdoors in general are for everyone, but um, sometimes just finding a single outhouse, like that's the one of the most inclusive bathrooms there are out in the outdoors. Single stalls are great. Um, you can check out some of these places. Obviously, us out in the field, Trevor Project. They're a suicide prevention group, as I mentioned before. PFLAG, that's the parents and families of lesbians and gays. Um, Rainbow Lorikeets, this is one of my favorite groups. They're with the American Ornithological Society. They're like out in the field, but for the birders. The Outdoors for Everyone, that's an initiative for the American Fisheries Society. That's fisheries professionals. GLSEN and the HRC, Human Rights Campaign, these are all advocacy groups for the queer community as well, and have lots of information on the websites if ever you're curious. They have lots of frequently asked questions. No question is too silly. PFLAG also has local chapters. So if a person in your family or your friends group comes out and you don't know what to do, that should be your first step. And you can talk to people about their experiences, what it means, that sort of thing, um, and help you be that ally that a lot of people strive for. But the other thing you can do if you really want to be an ally is put some of these deals somewhere up in your office or by your door. Safe space, all are welcome, or even just all are welcome in a rainbow font. Um, you know, the little equal sign HRC bumper sticker in the earlier days, that was how I identified a safe person. If you're willing enough to slap a bumper sticker on that you support same or marriage for everyone, that is a person I feel comfortable talking to. It's a small thing that you can do, but it's really powerful and it goes a long, long way. Um, the other thing is that visibility is important. If you're a wildlifer, if you're queer and out and comfortable, be that role model, be out and proud, and just be you. And you can be that role model for people that might be afraid to be themselves, their whole selves. If you're an ally, feel free, grab a pin, pop up, one of those logos in your office, on your car, whatever. Or just like, put a pride flag out, be brave. We don't own the rainbow flag. It's for everyone. And signal boost any, positive work that queer people might be doing for conservation and get that visibility out there. So those that come after us or those that are scared to come out and be out and proud and who they fully are, feel comfortable doing so. And then the other thing is, um, times are tough right now. I'm not going to preach about, uh, you know, beg for funding, whatever. There are lots of good causes, but if you wish and you're able to and you support our cause, um, out in the field does take donations. We have a sweet online store with all kinds of swag. You can buy little coffee mugs, shirts, hats, all that sort of stuff. Um, but there are tons of other organizations that also are more than willing to take donations. And many of the nonprofits out there, um, you can check with them about how they're like, do they have a diversity statement? Do they, um, similar with corporations, do they have a diversity statement? Do they support the community? And you can, with your purse, have the power. It's where your money goes is important. And if organizations that you are involved with don't necessarily support the things that you're in, you can take your money elsewhere and support the causes that are important to you. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and open it for questions. And I'm going to hopefully get this in the middle so I like look at the camera now. I have too many screens, so it's hard to jump back and forth.
What an amazing job articulating the subject matter. I learned a lot, and I just appreciate your time. I'm not sure if we have any questions in the Q&A box. I hope you see the nice comment that Anne left. Andy, I hope you can see the chat. She's just reiterating that as a educator, former educator, that it was always obvious to her that the support for LGBTQ plus students was critically important. So that's cool. Hear that testimony. Just wanted to share that. I got a couple questions for you. My first question was going to be like, like us as, myself as an ally for this community, like what's the single best thing I can do? But I mean, you hit like so many different ways to help support. I mean, you know, put out the flag, wear a hat. Like I have a 3 notch brewery hat that I picked up just outside of Charlottesville years ago, and it's actually manipulated their logo to represent the flag, and I love that hat, and I do wear it, and I appreciate you saying that just those simple acts can help show support. So I appreciate that. Um, but yeah, anything else you want to add to just how we can help be supportive? I think you covered a lot.
Yeah, it's, like with everything, there's a spectrum. Um, I would say uh, do some basic research. There's lots of information out there from reliable sources. Obviously, AI is a whole different ball of wax. Don't use the summary. Um, but any of the organizations I mentioned, and there are tons and tons and tons of others. Um, ALCU, which I totally forgot to mention, they have lots of information on what's affecting all kinds of groups of people. Um, but I think something that folks also don't always think about is that, um, like when you're doing big mailings or you're doing swag or you're doing t-shirts or whatever, you know, consider finding a queer business and supporting them, with your dollars. Similarly, if there are, queer friendly or queer owned businesses, that's another way to be supportive. There's also all kinds of groups that you can loop in where, it might be tangentially related. Gay Outdoors is a group of websites. They have state chapters where they just like go outside and do like the stuff that most of us love doing, hiking around or fishing or you know, chasing bobwhites around the field in the fall or whatever, um, backpacking, hike the AT, like all the things. And just being cognizant that in your endeavors, we're all part of oh, Sue, I just saw that thing in the chat. That's wonderful. The T is super important. Um, just be cognizant about it, very similarly, when you're doing these sort of things, it's the same sort of thing for helping communities of color, finding these businesses especially small businesses, you can make a big difference, even if it's just buying like $1,000 of t-shirts or whatever for a campaign. Um, there's often times where these identities will intersect, and you can, um, save two birds with one stone, you know?
Good answer. Appreciate that. I I feel like I need to make a comment that I appreciate you stating the quote about important not throwing out the cogs, like keeping every part, the intelligent tinkerer, because that is one of my favorite quotes from Leopold. So just giving a shout out to that you also mentioned it. I definitely need to look up the court case you mentioned. I'm not familiar with that, and I didn't know if you wanted to speak on it just for a second. The Loving versus
Loving
Virginia.
versus Virginia. There's
Yeah.
actually a wonderful movie about it, but essentially it was the court case that struck down the laws against interracial marriage. It was a Supreme Court case. Super important civil rights case. But the Respect for Marriage Act helped codify those Supreme Court decisions that had been precedent, even though the Supreme Court has been turning over a lot of precedent, that we thought was settled. Um, Things have been changing fast, and until it's law, you know, it's not. It seems like things that we assume are, foundational and forever aren't always, and so having that extra protection is helpful.
I feel like I gotta ask a habitat connectivity question. Um, from a Minnesota perspective, I mean, what's the wildlife crossings initiatives, habitat connectivity initiatives looking like there? Can you talk a little bit about where Minnesota's at with some of those?
Yeah, so we are lucky that much of our habitat is still relatively contiguous, at least for our forest species. Um, the prairies, however, are not in at all good shape, and it's just like prairies across the country. We're dealing with just little remnant pockets, and I don't know how we ever fully get out of that, but our agency, as well as our partners that we have. There's a number of organizations, TNC, of course, Pheasants and Quail Forever, I should say. They absorbed quail, the Quail Unlimited membership, um, and Wild Turkey Federation, Minnesota Wildlife Federation, a number of NGOs um, have been working with the state to try to build out some of these, stamps into larger and larger pieces and start to try to connect some of these. Um, it's been hit with mixed success, but we are very lucky in Minnesota because we have a constitutional amendment that takes a very small proportion of our sales tax, much like Missouri, and it goes to this big fund, excuse me, the Outdoor Heritage Fund. And so of it, I think it's 40 some percent goes to habitat and wildlife, 40% goes to waters, and then there's about 10% that goes to the arts. And so of those, a good amount of money goes towards boots on the ground conservation work, making things better, both for connectivity and just in general. But also it's for acquiring lands for public access, whether that's recreating, in a traditional consumptive use or just, out hiking around, birding, that sort of thing. Um, and as far as the connectivity piece, we are also flatlanders. So we don't have the, mountain valley system where a highway going through can totally block migration back and forth. In fact, I have a bear right now from Grand Rapids that's about 150 miles away in northeastern Ontario, just haul straight across all the lakes, just out doing her thing. And we have migrations of all kinds of critters. Bears migrate. I'm sure y'all know that in Virginia, but for us, bears will migrate towards the acorns. And so sometimes they'll move 100, maybe 70 miles for females is kind of on the top end, but 100 some for the males. Um, and yeah, that's kind of what we've got for migration, or I should say, corridor work. Most of it's kind of in the prairies and the wetland complexes. And the other big work that's going on is that as dams are deactivated, there's quite a lot of work in Minnesota on fisheries to switch to more like riffle staggered steps and dam removal. Um, like for the first time in the last, I think it was like a year or two ago, we had lake sturgeon reproducing in the Red River, much farther upstream than they ever have before. And there's evaluation now about how to take out a couple more dams on the Mississippi. Um, Obviously, that's tricky with migrating invasive carp. So there's a balance there, but in general, that's kind of what we're working on as a state. I'm just a one member of a state agency. There's tons of conservation work done well outside of DNR, but those are at least the ones that come to mind.
Um, One question here in the chat. I don't know if you can see that, Andy, from Sue, um, asking about any inclusive programming for youth.
Yeah, there's kind of two ways to go about it. One is the more subtle route, and I think is probably the easiest to start, which would just be, again, like I mentioned, if you're doing any sort of programming with youth in general, starting off, identifying yourself with pronouns and just sticking to the basics of everybody is respected, everybody is included here, and we're all going to work together towards this common thing that we're doing for programming. Um, if there's any sort of, hazing or teasing or bullying or that sort of thing, it's stopped right away, and then corrected. And that usually is you just want to make everybody feel safe and included. It's kind of the golden rule for that. On the high end, if you want to specifically design some sort of programming for queer youth specifically, that's a bit out of my normal wheelhouse. Um, we did have a young uh, there was a project in Rochester, Minnesota, kind of the southeastern part of the state. That's our mountains. Um, but it's a unglaciated piece of the state, and it's carved by rivers. It's beautiful bluff country, lots of biodiversity, and there was a targeted workshop for queer and questioning youth to um, provide them just opportunities to go out in nature. And it was funded as a grant program through the state's lottery. Part of our lottery dollars go into this trust fund that funds, outdoors and nature related things, conservation as well. And it was funded through that program. It was hosted by a trans woman out of the area that just started leading these groups. That's probably, that might be more than what you're looking for. The other thing is if you were involved in a local group, whatever it may be, whether that's church group, depending on your denomination, civic organizations, Scouts for America, not Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, it's Scouts for America. Everyone is welcome. Um, and some sort of those situations, or even within the school, so long as it's allowed. A gay straight alliance is often a common way to make everybody feel welcome and push for inclusion in your local group, but it just kind of depends on the scale at which you want to operate. And I'd recommend just starting small and working up from there. Again, being inclusive from the start, making everything deliberately a safe space for everybody is a really good place to start. And, you know, the golden rule is like one of the oldest things, it's back from the Confucius days. So it's never failed me in life. And I think probably for most people, it would be a great place to start.
Well said. Yeah, echoing the thanks from Sue. Andy, I think with that, we will conclude. Out of respect for your time, and just a big thank you for taking some time to speak to us tonight and our membership and constituents. I hope you will stay in touch. I'll follow up and get any follow up links or materials that you can think of that might be helpful as we touch base with some of the attendees through email with the recorded link, and definitely make sure you have that too. And please tell all the folks in the out in the field collective that I said hello, and I hope our paths cross again. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Thanks, y'all.
Yeah.
Keep doing the good work and happy to be part of it.
Have a good night. Appreciate it.